I've always been the older brother, the pillar of the family. I was always there for everyone without exception. When my brother fell into addiction, I was the one who rescued him from a dark corner, offering him a chance at rehabilitation. When my sister got pregnant early, I didn't hesitate to help, raising my niece while she finished college, which I paid for with the sweat of extra nights as a delivery driver. Every penny I earned, every hour of sleep I sacrificed was to ensure my family had a better chance. Mom always told me I was the man of the house since Dad passed, and I took that seriously. But as always, I gave without thinking of myself. My own future became secondary. But one day, everything changed. After years of dedication, I was left behind. And the only thing left for me was a deep feeling of abandonment. My name is Paul Traxler. I'm 40 years old, and to this day I carry the scars of a past that shaped me. But this is my story, and I'm going to tell it now. I was the oldest, the first to feel the weight of a father who disappeared on a cold February morning, leaving only a scribbled note and a forgotten coffee mug on the kitchen table. I was 8, with a responsibility I never asked for, to be the man of the house. From that day on, every decision I made came with the responsibility of not disappointing my mom or my siblings. Danny was just a little boy holding onto my arm, crying because Dad wouldn't come back to watch him play ball. Emily, a baby in Mom's arms, didn't understand anything, just cried along. Mom looked at me that night with swollen eyes and said, "You're my pillar now, Paul, the man of the house." I didn't know what that really meant, but I nodded, and from that moment I stopped being a child. At 12, I was already doing odd jobs at Mr. Jennings' grocery store. At 15, I swept floors and washed cars after school. When I turned 18, I became a delivery driver. At night, when my friends went out to parties, I went out to deliver with a backpack on my back and a GPS in my torn pocket. Every tip, every little extra, I saved. Not for myself, but for home, for my family. Danny started changing at 17. He pulled away, became quieter, more distant. I tried to talk to him, tried to understand, but he always said, "It's all good, Paul. I'm just tired." Then one night I got a call. It was the police. They had found my brother in an alley, disoriented, shaking, with red eyes from crying or using, maybe both. I rushed there. I found him sitting on the curb, curled up, dirty, with his hands on his face. "Paul," he whispered, "I don't know how to get out of this." I kneeled in front of him, smelled the sour stench of sweat and fear. "You'll get out, Danny, I'll get you out." I put him in the car and drove him to a rehab center. The treatment wasn't cheap. I sold my guitar, the only gift from my dad which I had kept since I was a kid, and still it didn't even cover the first week. So I started doing 3 shifts a day. I slept in the car between deliveries. Danny left the center 2 months later, clean but fragile. We started over. I was exhausted but determined. Not long after, Emily came crying to my room. She had just found out she was pregnant. The father of the child, some guy named Nate, had just disappeared when he heard the news. Emily fell into despair. "I messed everything up, Paul. I'll never finish college. I'll never manage." I sat beside her on the bed, hugged her tightly. "You will finish, and I'll be by your side for that." I started taking care of little Lily like she was my daughter. I made bottles in the middle of the night, changed diapers before work, rocked her in my arms while writing reports for the workshop. And Emily managed to graduate. On graduation day, she walked across the stage with Lily in her arms, looked for me in the crowd, and said into the microphone, "This diploma is also for my brother, who never let me fall." My eyes welled up. Mom hugged me tight on cold nights, saying, "You're my pride, my golden boy. You held this house up," and I believed it. I believed I was doing the right thing, that all of this would pay off somehow, that when it was my time to need, I wouldn't be alone. But the tide turned. At 32, after years of carrying others on my back, my body gave up. A serious pneumonia hit me out of nowhere. I was bedridden, coughing until I almost lost my breath. I lost my job. The bills started piling up like letters threatening to collapse. The rent was overdue, the electricity about to be cut off. That's when I took a deep breath and went to my mom's house, my last refuge. I knocked on the door with the strength I had left. She opened with a smile, but that smile quickly faded when she saw how pale and trembling I was. "Mom, I need help," I said, my voice hoarse. She hesitated, looked behind her as if measuring the weight of my presence against what she was already carrying. "Paul, I already have so much to deal with. Danny's in therapy, Emily has no one to leave Lily with, and my back's been hurting for weeks. I can sleep on the couch," I insisted, my voice almost a whisper. "Just for a few days." She lowered her eyes. "I don't have space, son. I don't have space." Those words echoed like thunder, all those years hearing, "You're my safe harbor." And now I was a burden. I turned and walked away without saying anything, crossed the block with shaky legs, went back to the basement I rented from a friend, a damp room with an old couch and a cracked window. I lay down, feeling the cold from the floor rise up my back. That night I stared at the ceiling and let the tears fall without resistance. Not from anger, not from sadness, but from a deep, crushing realization. I was alone. Alone. After everything. The next morning, I went to the garage. I stared at my bike. Old, but still full of life. My only possession. I ran my hand over the scratched tank as if saying goodbye to a friend. I sold it for a ridiculous price, but enough for something that was starting to take shape inside me. I bought a one-way bus ticket. Chose the place almost in the dark. Norwood, Colorado. A forgotten dot on the map. It was exactly what I wanted. I didn't leave a note. I didn't warn anyone. Not even Emily. I grabbed my backpack, my clothes, and my dignity, the last still intact, and left. The bus swayed down the road while I looked out the window. The city slowly disappeared. The faces, the names, the memories, all left behind. I didn't know yet, but that had been my last night on that old couch, where I was the first to rise and the last to rest. From then on, something new was born inside me. Something I didn't even know. I sold my motorcycle, the very same one I built with my own hands, piece by piece over 5 years. Every screw, every adjustment to the engine was a scar from my story. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was what reminded me that I had dreams too. It was the first time I cried without making a sound, just leaning on the handlebars, with my forehead sweating cold even in the winter. The buyer showed up smiling, a young enthusiast who barely looked at me. He handed over the folded money and said, "Take good care of her." I nodded and turned away before he started the engine. I didn't want to see. I couldn't see. With the little money I had, I packed what was left. 2 pairs of pants, an old jacket, a picture of Lily smiling on my lap, and a hardcover notebook where I used to jot down goals I never got to fulfill. Silently, I closed the door to the basement where I had spent the last few months. I didn't leave a note, no messages, not even for Mom. What I had to say had already become invisible in the cracks of that house, and no one cared to see. I chose Norwood, Colorado because the name sounded anonymous, small, cold, a place where I could just be another guy and not the older brother who held everything together. That's what I wanted now, to be nobody. I arrived with my backpack on my shoulders and my bones weighing like lead. The bus dropped me off at the edge of a road surrounded by pine trees and biting wind. The sun barely appeared through the dense clouds, and the air had a clean, woody smell that hurt and healed me at the same time. I walked to the center, which was made up of 3 streets crossing in the shape of a T. I found a bar with a worn facade, a faded sign, and a second floor with cracked windows. The owner, a quiet guy named Gus, rented me a room by the week with a thin mattress and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. I paid in advance and said, "I just need silence." Gus nodded. "You'll have plenty of that here." That first night, I slept straight through, something I hadn't done in months. No baby crying, no family arguing, no memories knocking at the door. Just the sound of wind blowing through the windows and the constant smell of alcohol from the floor below. The next morning, I saw a sign posted on a light pole. Help wanted. Pine Hollow Lumber. Heavy labor. Weekly pay. I didn't think twice. I walked there with my hands in my pockets and my heart still somewhat numb. The lumber yard was at the end of a dirt path, surrounded by tall trees and noisy machines. It felt like entering another world, one of wood, sweat, and simplicity. I was greeted by a tall guy with a gray beard and a battered hat. Jack, the supervisor. "You new around here?" he asked, without taking the cigarette out of the corner of his mouth. "New and broke," I answered. He chuckled softly, but it wasn't mocking. It felt like he recognized the pain in my voice. "Well, wood doesn't ask who you were. It just asks if you can handle the weight. Can you?" "I think so, and if I can't, I'll learn." That's how I started. The work was tough. Carrying logs, stacking beams, helping with the sawmill. My hands burned by the end of the day. My back complained with every step. But there was something purifying about that routine. No one asked if I had a degree or if I saved a brother from addiction. They just wanted to know if I could handle it. In the first days, I stayed quiet. I ate lunch alone in a corner of the barn, eating a cold sandwich while I watched the others talk. It wasn't that I didn't want to speak. I just didn't know how to be anyone other than the guy in pain. It was Jack who struck up a conversation one day when he saw me stumble while carrying an especially heavy log. "These bastards here are tricky," he said, holding the other side with me. "They seem light until you trust them too much." "Like life," I replied, almost without thinking. He let out a short laugh. "You seem like someone who's taken a few good falls. Some that left a mark." The following week, he had me operating one of the presses. He said I had steady hands and a good head. He gave me a new pair of gloves like a gesture of respect. And for the first time, someone believed in me, without needing me to be a hero. I started talking to the others little by little. There was Miguel, a Mexican who sent pictures of his grandchildren every morning. There was Kenny, an ex-military guy who only spoke after breakfast. And there was Claire, the only woman on the team, who sharpened the saws with a precision that made me jealous. She quickly noticed that I was too young to have that tired look. "You run from something, Paul?" she asked one day while we shared a bag of chips sitting in the back of a truck. "I didn't run. I stepped away. It's different. So more like exile." I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled for real. At night, in my room, I started writing again in the hardcover notebook. No goals now, just loose thoughts. Memories that came like the tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes destructive. I wrote about my motorcycle, about the alley where I found my brother, about Lily's laugh, about my mother's empty stare, and about that moment of silence when I realized the world wasn't going to save me, and maybe I shouldn't try to save it anymore. At the end of the first month, Jack called me into his office. "You work well. You're reliable. Don't complain. That's rare these days." I accepted the compliment with humility. I just needed a place where no one expected me to be more than an ordinary man. He stood up from his chair, grabbed a piece of paper, and signed something. "I put you on the permanent list. You'll get a quarterly bonus, and if you keep it up, I can teach you how to operate the main machines." I stood there for a moment. So much had crumbled inside me over the past few years, and here was a man offering me a future, just like that. I thanked him and walked back down the dirt trail. The sun was starting to set, painting the mountains with a sad, beautiful gold. The smell of pine and sawdust filled my chest. It was like breathing for the first time, but within that relief there was something more. A restlessness. A certainty that grew slowly. This place smelled like rebirth, but I was still going to have to bleed a lot to deserve a new beginning. The days started to chain together like logs on the conveyor belt at the sawmill. one after another, with the same rhythmic noise, the same smell of freshly cut wood in the air. Before I knew it, months had passed, and I wasn't the same man who had arrived in Norwood with slumped shoulders and a soul in tatters. I learned to operate each machine at the sawmill as if it were an extension of my body. The hydraulic press, the lathe, the bandsaw, all with their own rhythms, their quirks. Jack told me I had a kind of silent listening, that I understood the wood before I even cut it. And it was true. I began to realize there was something almost spiritual about working with raw pine logs. You didn't impose anything on them. You conversed with them. Touched, listened, felt. Some were too dry, cracked easily. Others were still green and demanded patience. Like people. "You have the look of someone who's lived too much, Paul," Jack remarked one afternoon as we cleaned the saw filters. "And someone who's lived too much learns to be silent. It's silence that teaches the most, Jack." He smiled. One of those knowing smiles from someone who understands the pain without needing to translate it. Little by little, I earned the respect of everyone. Claire started calling me the Wood Whisperer. Kenny said I had old man's hands and a boy's eyes. And Miguel, always with that melancholy humor, called me the Ghost of Baltimore. "You've died over there, haven't you?" he asked me one day. Died, and was reborn here. On Saturdays, I began helping Jack with the company's paperwork. Numbers, inventory, cutting schedules, all the things he hated but which, curiously, I came to understand easily. The time I spent trying to balance my dysfunctional family's finances in Baltimore now seemed to have some real value. It was one afternoon in September, when the wind already had a taste of autumn, that Jack called me to the back office. He was more serious than usual, his hat thrown on the table and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "I need to tell you something. Old man Carter, he's retiring." "Carter, one of the owners?" "Yeah, and he suggested you." I was silent. I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean, suggested me?" "To take over his share, to become a partner." I laughed without humor. "You're kidding, Jack." "I'm not. You deserve it. And more than that, you belong here, Paul. The wood knows you. We know you." It took me weeks to believe it. The contract arrived. It was signed with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. Paul Traxler, the man no one wanted to help when he fell, was now a partner at Pine Hollow Timber Works. But don't think the story turned into a fairy tale. There were nights I woke up sweating, heart racing, hands empty. I dreamt of the basement in Baltimore, of Lily crying, of my mother looking right through me as if I'd never existed. The pain came in waves, and the longing. The longing was for something I might never have truly had. A hug. "You deserve rest too, Paul." Someone to say everything will be okay, and make it stay, even if it didn't. I learned to take care of myself, to cook my own dinner, to wash my clothes, to make my bed in a way that made me feel worthy, even if no one else was looking. Every little gesture became resistance. Every morning I chose to get out of bed, even with my soul raw, was a victory. Over time, I bought a little wooden house on top of a hill, overlooking the valley. Simple, but mine. It was as if I had finally built my own ground. I planted 2 pine trees in the yard and started walking around the property every morning, listening to the sounds of the wind and my own steps. Peace has a sound, and I was learning to hear it. That autumn, the trees began to bleed colors. Bright reds, intense oranges, burnt yellows, as if the world were on fire before freezing. It was my first full season there, and I decided to mark the moment symbolically. At the back of my closet, I kept a box, crumpled, covered in tape, with my name written on it in pen. Inside were pieces of another life, letters from my sister with drawings of Lily, paid bills in someone else's name, a silver necklace from my mother with the word hope, and photos. Lots of photos, some with fake smiles, others with swollen eyes, but one in particular, me as a child by a river with mud up to my knees and a wide grin, froze me for minutes. That boy, did he still exist? I took the box to the yard when the sky was already turning purple. I stacked some dry branches and started building a bonfire. The fire rose quickly, strong, almost furious, a symbol of what I was about to leave behind. I started tossing the photos in one by one, the letters, the memories. They burned quickly, but the smoke seemed to carry centuries. The embers cracked as if speaking to me. I only kept one image. The smiling boy. I put it in my shirt pocket and closed my eyes. "You're coming with me," I whispered. "Now I'm the one who takes care of you." But when I turned to go inside, I realized I wasn't alone. A figure stood on the road, illuminated only by the orange light of the fire, watching me. My heart leapt. It was a woman. Dark-haired, wearing a thick coat with an unreadable expression. She seemed to hesitate, as if she'd walked many miles and didn't know whether she had arrived or if she should still run. I took a step. "Can I help?" She took a while to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice came low but firm. "You are Paul Traxler?" I felt my stomach twist. "I am. I have something to give you. It's about your family. And Baltimore." The past, which I thought I had buried in the fire, was knocking at the door again. And this time, it came dressed in mystery and promises I didn't know if I wanted to hear. At that moment I understood. As much as the wood accepted me, as much as the saw sang, life had other plans. And some ghosts don't burn so easily. My 40th birthday arrived quietly. No expectations, no requests to the universe. Just another day on the calendar, or so I thought. I woke up early as usual with the light filtering through the thick curtains of my house on the hilltop. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and let the cold wind remind me that autumn was already painting the world with shades of melancholy. I had no plans to celebrate. I'd work half a shift at the sawmill and then maybe stop by Pete's bar, have a dark IPA, and head home. But when I got to the sawmill, the gate was locked with a chain and a note taped on it. "Today the boss doesn't work. It's company policy. We'll see you at 6 p.m. at the Red Elk." Signed, Jack, Claire, Miguel, and the rest of the saw gang. I smiled to myself, shaking my head. They had planned something, and I had no idea what awaited me. At exactly 6 o'clock, I went to the Red Elk, the bar where I had rented my first little room years ago. On the outside, nothing seemed different. The same faded paint, the crooked sign, the smell of pine and old beer in the air. But when I pushed the door, "Surprise!" The voices exploded like fireworks. The bar was packed. There were makeshift balloons hanging from the wooden beams, a crooked banner reading, "Paul 4.0, hand-painted," and in the corner, a small bluegrass band playing lively folk music. Jack was wearing a ridiculous party hat. Claire was holding an apple pie with crooked candles stuck in the middle. Miguel was at the table, raising a glass and shouting, "To the man who reinvented himself with his own hands." There were laughs, hugs, backslaps, and emotional toasts. I stood there, not really knowing where to put my hands, a little surprised to feel belonging. For the first time in many years, I realized I had a new family. One that wasn't born from blood ties, but from something rarer: respect, effort, and presence. "You deserve it, Paul," Claire said, hugging me. "The town wouldn't be the same without you." Jack appeared beside me, already a little tipsy from the beer. "I bet Baltimore never threw you a party like this." I laughed. Baltimore never even made me coffee. In the middle of the conversation, I went to the back porch to get some air. The sky was dark, dotted with stars, and the smell of burning wood came from a fireplace somewhere in the distance. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to take it all in. That's when I heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of the bar. The headlights slowly turned off, and for a moment I felt something strange in my chest. I recognized that car, not by the model but by the sensation, as if the past had returned on 4 wheels. The door opened and a woman stepped out with slumped shoulders, gray hair tied in a loose bun. She was wearing a loose coat, as if trying to shield herself from both the cold and the passing of time. My mother. The world seemed to go silent. Even the music inside faded for a few moments. She stopped at the door, looking around as if unsure whether she should have come. Then our eyes met. For a second, I didn't see the woman who had turned her back on me when I needed her most. I saw the lady who carried me to school as a child, who embroidered my name on my socks when winter came, who called me my little warrior before bedtime. But that look, it was different. Smaller, weary, as if time had shrunk the strength she once carried, as if absence had eaten away at parts of her too. She came toward me slowly. Short steps. Her hands were trembling. "Paul." Her voice faltered before the rest came out. I failed you." I stayed silent. It was as if I had waited my whole life to hear that. But when it finally came, I didn't know what to do with the words. She continued, eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me, son. I should have been better. I should have seen you. I should have stayed." The silence between us was almost as heavy as the logs I carried in the first days here. "You left me alone, Mom," I murmured, my voice thick. "When I needed you the most." She nodded, defenseless, without justification, just raw truth. "I know, and I've never stopped blaming myself. For you, for everything that happened. I thought you were strong enough not to break, but you were just a boy, and I hid behind the pain of others. I forgot to look at yours." The words hit deep, but they didn't heal. They didn't erase the nights spent on other people's couches, the cold in my bones, the screams I swallowed to keep the house standing. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all this time?" She took a deep breath. "Because your sister showed me a picture of you. She said you were doing well. She said you built all this on your own. And for the first time in years, I felt shame. A shame that burned. I should have come sooner, Paul. But I was afraid. Afraid of not being forgiven. Afraid that you wouldn't want to see me anymore." She reached out her hand, but hesitated in mid-gesture, as if she knew that touch could be too much, or not enough. "I just wanted to see you, to hug you, and tell you that despite everything, I've always loved you." The world turned slowly in that moment. A chapter was closing, but the scar wouldn't disappear. The hole she left in me would never be fully closed. It was too deep, too old. But maybe I could learn to live with it. I took a deep breath. I looked inside the bar where my new family was waiting for me. Then I looked at her. My origin, my pain, my mother. I took a step forward and hugged her. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation hug. It was a hug of goodbye to the bitterness, of acceptance of the past, of an attempt to salvage whatever could still be saved. "Happy birthday, my son," she whispered, her voice dissolving on my shoulder. "Thank you for coming," I replied. And in that instant, I wasn't the strong man of the sawmill, the partner at the timber company, the pillar of anyone. I was just the son, the boy in the photo, trying to find a new space within his own chest. But before I could return to the main room and cut the cake with my friends, she handed me an envelope. White, simple, but with my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. "It's from your father," she said, with eyes filled with something I couldn't name. He wants to see you. He's sick. He said he needs to tell you something. Something about the past, about why he left." My hand trembled as I took the envelope. The past insisted on pulling me even when everything around me told me the present was enough. And in that moment, I understood. The fire from the bonfire had burned many pains, but not all the answers were in the ashes. Some were still to come, and they could change everything I thought I knew. I hugged my mother tightly, but not with the raw strength that carries logs or holds entire houses together. It was a different kind of strength, one I didn't even know still lived in me, the strength of a boy who, despite everything, still longed for his mother's embrace. She was lighter than I remembered, smaller, as though time had eaten away part of her structure. And for the first time, I felt her fragility in my arms. She trembled, and it wasn't just from the cold of the mountain night. It was from fear, regret, and waiting. She rested her face on my shoulder, and for a moment the world seemed to turn back into the backyard of our old house in Baltimore, where I ran with scraped knees and she'd call me my little warrior. But there, on that wooden porch, I was no longer a child, and she was no longer invincible. "Paul," she whispered, her voice weak, muffled by emotion. "Thank you." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes. "I forgive you, Mom," I said, my heart aching but steady. "I've always loved you, even when it hurt." She sobbed, and the sound tore something inside me. There was sincerity in that embrace. Late, yes, but real. It was as if we had finally found the right language after a lifetime of trying to communicate through mixed signals. We stayed there for a time I can't measure. All I know is that, when we pulled apart, she looked me in the eye, as if asking permission to dream. "Can I stay for a few days?" she asked. "I don't want to be a bother, but just to feel you close, just to see how you live now." The words weighed heavily. On one hand, part of me wanted to say yes, with the urgency of someone afraid that time would take away another chance. But there was a deeper part of me that knew. I took a deep breath. I felt the cold air enter, clearing something old in my chest. "No, Mom." She paled, and her eyes brightened again, but not with joy. "This world here is different," I continued carefully. "I had to leave to survive. I had to forget the voices that told me to always be strong, to always give in. I built this life with hands dirty from dirt, from sawdust, from tears. And here, I'm alive. For the first time, truly." She lowered her gaze, and her shoulders sagged like wet branches. But there was no anger there. There was acceptance, maybe even relief. Because deep down, she knew this was a space she hadn't helped plant. "I understand," she said with difficulty. "I just wanted to see you happy, and now that I have, I can go in peace." Those words, though simple, had something final about them, as if they closed a story that had been too long, too heavy. She stayed that night at a simple inn across the square, recommended by Claire. She asked for a room without a view, saying she didn't need luxury. She just wanted to sleep in peace after so many years carrying the weight of regret. The next day, early in the morning, she came back to the bar to say goodbye. I was already there, drinking coffee on the porch as usual. The sky was still pink, and the mist rose slowly from the ground as if the world was waking up carefully. She approached slowly. She wore the same coat from the night before and carried a small wrapped package. "For you," she said, extending it. "It's not much, but I found it the other day. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew one day I'd see you again." I opened the package. It was an old notebook, the worn leather cover, the corners peeling. I recognized it immediately. It was my journal from when I was 9 or 10. The one I used to draw the houses I wanted to build, the cars I dreamed of driving, and the families I imagined having. I flipped through it in silence. There were the scribbles, the made-up names, the maps of a life I never lived. On the last page, there was a note that wasn't mine. I spent too much time thinking he didn't need me, but he was just a boy. My boy. "Mom." I slowly closed the notebook, carefully, and when I looked at her I realized my mother was already leaving even before getting into the car. She hugged me again, lighter this time, as if part of the weight had stayed there, on the porch, between the dewdrops and the silent promises. "If you ever want to find me," she said, already with her hand on the car door handle. "I'll be there. Always." I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Mom." She got into the car and started the engine. The old sound of the engine seemed the same as our old truck from years ago. I stood there watching as she drove down the dirt road that led to the highway. The dust rose in slow clouds, mixing with the morning mist, and for the first time that dust didn't suffocate me. On the contrary, It felt familiar, like the traces of the past that after so long were finally starting to settle. I stood there, still, until the car disappeared on the horizon. The wind whistled through the trees as if whispering something I finally understood. I went back into the bar and sat at the table by the window. Claire brought me more coffee without saying a word. She just left the cup, gave a soft tap on my shoulder, and went back to the counter. I opened the notebook again. I looked at one of the drawings. It was a house in the middle of a field, with mountains in the background. At the door, a small figure smiled, holding a cup. I had written underneath in crooked handwriting, "Here I will be happy one day." I smiled, not because I won, not because I forgot, but because somehow, even with all the losses, the cracks, the silences, I found myself. And in that moment, with the smell of fresh coffee in the air, the sun painting the sky, and the old notebook on the table, I realized that no matter how long it took, some hurt boys grow into whole men, and I was one of them.